Hi guys, it's Steffi from the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to another Books Beside My Bed video. For those of you who are new here, I film one of these every week where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. And for those who are very familiar with the series, welcome back. This is my reading week from the 1st to the 5th of October. This was a slightly shorter week because of my holiday and everything that happened last week with the 2-part wrap up. That said, I did still read 11 books. 6 of them were middle grade though, and they take seriously like an hour and a half to read because they are so short and relatively easy to get through. The other 5 were all adult books. This week I read a total of 2,425 pages and my yearly reading total is 294 books. I'm going to be super honest, I have really done very little this week. I've actually been quite tired. I've gone back to doing Pilates and I've done a lot of grocery shopping. I've also become recently plant mad. Well, not that recent, but just even more plant mad. You might see one of my new plant babies up in the back corner there. That is my Snow Queen Pothos, and I'm very, very excited to have her. She's lovely. And I also have another new plant in my living room. I may have also attempted to go out and buy more plants, but I stopped myself. I will be filming a plant video sometime in the near future, so stay tuned for that. On to the books. The first 5 middle grade books are actually books that my kids are going to be reading in the classroom this term, so I made sure to read them before I went back to work. It's always good to know the content that you're reading with your kids. The first book that I read is Tashi and the Genie by Anna Feenberg, Barbara Feenberg and Kim Gamble. This is sort of like an Australian classic book. It was originally published in 1997 by Allen and Unwin, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Tashi is a wonderful book. It's sort of like an urban fantasy book for middle grade, and it follows the story of Tashi, who becomes friends with Jack in a town that he's now living in, and Tashi tells Jack all these wonderful stories about his life before he came to be where he is, and this one involves obviously a genie and wish granting, as well as revisiting the warlord who Tashi spent some time with. So it is a really fun, adorable, easy to read story. These orange tabs are actually our week markers because I'm going to read this over a couple of weeks with one particular group of students, but they are very interested in Tashi and they actually picked to read this book. So I'm very excited to start that with them in the near future. Then I read A Different Land. This was also published by Allen & Unwin, but this is a 2019 release by Paul Jennings. Paul Jennings is another very famous Australian author. When I was growing up, he was writing a lot of that real kid humor type books, but in recent years he seems to have turned to the more serious topics. This is a bit of a historical fiction story, and it is set in the Australian outback. A mother and her son and another boy that they've picked up along the way have escaped the war, and they've come out to Australia in order to live there while the war is going on. And the mother has found a job, but the person didn't realize that she was a woman, and so it's a bit of a rocky start, but they end up working and living outside an outback pub. And the son is very suspicious of the man who has hired his mother and sets out to try and uncover his secrets. This was a really fun, very easy to read story. There are a couple of other books, A Different Dog and A Different Boy. I don't know if they're actually connected to this book, but you can read this on its own. I did. It's perfectly fine. This one will be interesting to see how the kids react to it because we haven't read a lot of historical fiction, and I think that'll be really interesting, particularly the group of students who chose to read this. Then I read Water Wings by Maurice Gleitzman, again another Australian author. This is also a book that's been around for many, many years. It was first published in 1996. This edition was published by Puffin, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is the story of Pearl, who lives with her mother, and her mother has just started dating someone new, and Pearl is desperate for a grandmother. And this only escalates when her pet guinea pig, Winston, passes away quite suddenly, and suddenly Pearl needs some advice, and so she desperately writes to her mother's partner's mother to come and look after her. And it's really the story about learning to deal with grief, learning to move on, learning to be who you are. There are lots of things to do around death and loss of a loved one in this book, so that's something to be aware of if you're reading it with kids who are sensitive to that. But there's some humor blended in with it, but it's overall just a really enjoyable read. I also read How to Make a Movie in 12 Days by Fiona Hardy. This is a new release book from Affirm Press Kids, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. It is the story of Hayley, who is 12 years old and has always dreamed of being a filmmaker. And at the start of the book, she's dealing with the loss of a grandmother. There's a lot of themes of loss in kids' books. Her grandmother was going to help her make this film. She's been left some money by her grandmother. Her parents used that to buy her a proper camera. And so Hayley sets out to make this movie with her friends in a very short time period. and then things start to go wrong and Hayley believes that her film is being sabotaged. And it's really about friendship, almost about temperance, about being kind to one another, and about being aware of what other people are going through. It was just a really lovely story. I'm glad I read it. This is quite a long book, but the kids who are choosing to read this are actually quite prolific, very good readers, and I'm looking forward to unpacking this with them because I think they'll get a lot out of it. I also read Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. This is a children's classic book. It was originally published in 1953. This edition was published by Puffin, I think probably in 2006, around about that time. It is an illustrated edition and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I'm still a hit and miss with classics, even if they are kids' classics as well. This is a very famous story. It is the story of Wilbur, who is a young pig that is saved by a young girl called Fern from being killed because he's the runt of the litter. Wilbur goes to live on Fern's uncle's farm, and there he meets a whole host of animals, including Charlotte, who is a spider. Wilbur discovers that he is going to be killed, and so he begs the others to help him, and so Charlotte does, and it is the story of their friendship. It is a story of growing up. It was nice to read the source material. I have known the story for a very long time, but I've never actually read it, so that was a really good thing to do. There are some kids who are very excited to read this term, which is great because we've got such a variety of books that we're going to be reading in the classroom, from classics to contemporary books to fantasy. I love it. There's such a great variety going on. And yes, I did let my kids, well, I chose a selection of texts and they got to choose which books they wanted to read. They haven't found out exactly which book they're reading, but they got to rank their preferences. So they'll find out on Monday or Tuesday. The final middle grade book that I read this week was Rise of the Mythics, The Golden Unicorn by Ando. This is his new release book from Allen and Unwin, and I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. I've got some kids who are obsessed with Ando's books in my classroom, so I had to buy this and read it so that I can take it in for them. It is a fantasy story about a villain called the Soul Collector who was a man but found some mythical artifacts and gained some powers, and now he is trying to steal all of the beauty in the world. And this book follows the rise of the unicorn, and her name is Kelly. She thinks she's an ordinary girl, except she can run really fast, and then suddenly she starts sprouting unicorn horn and things go from there. So it is a real fantasy adventure story. It was enjoyable, and I know that there are some kids who are going to love this. Now on to my adult reads for the week. I did finish Force of Nature by Jane Harper. This was a 2018 release from Flatiron Books, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is the second book in the Aaron Falk series, and this follows Aaron as he and his partner investigate a missing persons case, sort of. A group of businessmen and women go off into the woods and they're on a sort of bonding trip where at bonding and what's the other word? I don't know. Team building. It's a team building exercise. There are 2 groups. The male group goes off and then the female group goes off. But in the women's group, 5 women enter and only 4 come out at the end of the trip. And that one missing woman is working with Aaron and his partner on a financial case that they are investigating. And so they go out there to investigate and find out what's happening and to see if they can find the information that she was trying to give them as well. This one was very atmospheric. I probably didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed The Dry because I think there was less Aaron in the book, and I find Aaron to be a really interesting main character. But overall, it was still an enjoyable story. I kept turning the pages. I didn't want to put it down. I wanted to find out what was going on. And I was satisfied with the ending, so that's always a good thing. Then I read The Bridge Kingdom by Danielle L. Jensen. This is an adult fantasy book. This came in my Bay Crate box, so it is an adult fantasy romance book. And it was enjoyable and fun. This was originally published in 2018. This edition was, well, commissioned by Bay Crate. It is a special hardcover foiled edition that I absolutely loved. It's one of the nicest books that I've received all year. And I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is the story of Lara, who has grown up in her father's kingdom with the sole purpose of being raised to potentially be the bride for the king of the Bridge Kingdom. And her goal there is to seduce him and then betray this king. The very first chapter of this book opens up with her doing something rather unscrupulous for interesting reasons, and I was completely taken aback by it, and that really set the tone for the book because I wasn't expecting it to get that violent or for her to be that devious from the start of the book, which was nice. It was nice to be surprised by a fantasy book. And Lara eventually goes to the Bridge Kingdom. She meets Aaron. She very quickly learns and realizes that perhaps everything that she was taught about the Bridge Kingdom is not exactly true, and she needs to reevaluate why she's doing what she's doing and where her allegiances really lie. But I did enjoy it. I may continue with the series. I haven't decided yet. This was a pretty satisfying read, and I really liked Aaron, who was the king of the Bridge Kingdom. He was awesome. Then I read Stuck Up Suit by Vi Keeland and Penelope Ward. This is a 2016 release from Kindle, and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is part of one of their series. I can't remember what it is. It is the story of Graham, who is a man who has risen to the top of the business world on his own. He started his own business and now he's doing really, really well, except he has a temper and he is not very nice to his employees. And then one day he loses his phone on the train and Soraya picks it up. Soraya works as an assistant for an advice columnist and she finds his phone and she thinks he is quite rude. And so she holds onto his phone, does a bit of snooping, but then decides that she's going to return the phone to him. Except when she goes to return the phone, he refuses to see her. And so she says some choice words to him and then leaves some interesting photos on his phone. He then begins to pursue her because no one ever really talks to him like that, and their romance goes from there. And then it gets a lot more complicated because there is a whole lot of things going on with his ex-fiance and his ex-business partner, and the whole thing is just very much like a soap opera. Every now and then I like reading those things. It's not something that requires a lot of brain power, and that's what I needed at the time that I read it. I don't even know if I'm going to say this name correctly for the title of this next book, but I think it's Adirondack Attack by Jenna something. Normally I would write these things down, but I've forgotten to. Anyway, it is a Mills & Boon intrigue book. It was published in 2019 and I gave it 3.5 out of 5 stars. I've actually been meaning to try their intrigue line because I do like sort of that action story. And yeah, there's some romance, but the romance was really light in the book. It was more about the actual action sequence, which was ridiculous, but enjoyable. It is the story of Dalton, who is a former Marine turned New York City detective, and his wife, Erin, who is an outdoors group leader. She likes to be outdoors and she leads groups out on walks and kayaking trips and all that sort of stuff. At the start of the book, they are in the middle of a trial separation, which Dalton doesn't agree with, but his wife has basically said if he doesn't stop putting himself in harm's way, she wants out of the relationship because she doesn't want to deal with the stress of it. So he goes after her while she is on one of her camping trips. And when they catch up with each other, they find themselves in the middle of a situation that no one could have predicted, in that there is a terrorist plot going on, and they end up with one piece of evidence from it. And then they have to take that evidence out of the woods and they have to survive doing that in the first place. They're being pursued by everyone. It's all very spy, intrigue sort of stuff. Like I said, totally ridiculous, but an enjoyable evening read. It didn't take very long to read. I will read a few more of the intrigue line because I'm curious. Finally, the last book that I read this week was To Be Taught If Fortunate by Becky Chambers. This has been one of my most anticipated reads all year. I finally read it. It's been sitting in my apartment for about a month. And that's probably the longest that any Becky Chambers book has sat in my possession without being read. It is a novella. It is a 2019 release from Hodder and Stoughton, and I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. All I can say about this is I do not always like character-driven books because I tend to find them slow. But I will read any book that Becky Chambers writes because all of her books are very much character-driven. But they're done in such a way that it doesn't feel like it. You actually feel like you're connected to all of these characters right from the word go. And this one is more science heavy than her Wayfarer series. It is the story of Ariadne, who is the engineer on a ship that is traveling to 4 habitable worlds outside our solar system. I mean, this is a very popular book on BookTube, so you've probably already heard this, but instead of trying to terraform the planets so that they can work on them, every time they travel to a new planet, they enter a sleep and their body is somaformed. I think that's the word. So their body is changed to meet the requirements of being able to work on that planet. They still have to wear suits and things when they go out in the atmosphere, but their body is, if there is really heavy gravity, their body density and muscle density is adjusted so that they can actually work in those conditions without being crushed. It is really sort of this quiet exploration of what it means to be a traveler in space and to be a scientist and to be seeking new things. And there are times when they are joyful and there are times when the situation is so horrible that it just causes so much stress on everyone involved. Ariadne is a team of 4 people. After a while though, they lose contact with Earth and they have to make a decision about whether or not they're going to go forward with their mission or not. And I've heard a lot of people say that they weren't happy with the ending. I hadn't heard spoilers, but I took that to mean that a decision was going to be made in one particular way, and I knew that I would have an issue with that. But actually, the ending is quite open-ended. I like that in a book like this. You need some room for it to be open to interpretation, and this definitely was, and I very much enjoyed that. Did I enjoy it as much as the Wayfarer series? Perhaps not. I don't know. I'm still on the fence about whether or not to bump this up to a 5, but I did really enjoy it. It was just a wonderful, wonderful read. Those are all the books that I have read in the last 7 days. Now, I know on Twitter I posted a photo that said I was going to talk about this, which is my new TBR game, in this video, but this video is quite long already. So I'm actually going to film a separate video, and it will go up on Wednesday, where I will talk a little bit more about my newfound game. In the comments, let me know if you have read any of the books that I've read this week, or alternatively, let me know what you have been reading. I hope that wherever you're in the world, you're having a wonderful day, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye guys.